along in hour number 2 of the program today. Jeff Kennedy, Monica Burris, with you as always until 9 o'clock. We are joined this segment by our good friend of the program, Dr. Dan McMillan. Good morning, Dan. How are you?
I'm terrific, Jeff. It's great to be with you.
Great to have you on again, Dan. And sure, we have a much better connection than last time, although I got to tell you, my friend, like when I grow up, I want to live your life, because the last time we talked, you were vacationing in the islands. Where, like, what really cool adventure have you been on recently?
Well, since the last time, I was up in New Hampshire last week, meeting with my allies up there. I've partnering with an organization up there to promote voter-owned elections, which is really, I think, a better term for this democracy dollars reform that I advocate for kind of breaking the power of big money in politics. I got to give a talk to a Rotary Club in White River Junction, Vermont, and met with my allies. They had their annual meeting, and it was okay. I guess it's not a tropical island adventure, but it was a lot of fun, and I really like what I saw. Really good people up there.
Absolutely. For those of our listeners that are maybe just tuning into this segment with you for the first time and not as familiar with Saving Democracy in America and the idea of democracy dollars, can you just give us a quick overview of that, please?
Thanks so much, Jeff. Yeah, I mean, basically, probably the biggest single source of the woes of our political system and why Americans of both parties, I think, are kind of feeling like they don't have a lot to vote for, and for, I think, a lot of this anger and polarization and so much else, is the simple fact that our government, at least at the national level, is for sale to high-dollar campaign donors who pay for the obscenely expensive election campaigns of our politicians. And the last 3 cycles, 18, 20, and 22, shattered previous fundraising records. And so I lead a nonpartisan effort to achieve passage of a reform that is, I think, is best. I've called it democracy dollars, but voter-owned elections is a better way to put it. And the principle is simply this: given that the only people who still have any juice in Washington are these big campaign donors, we got to make ourselves the donors. And in practice, at the federal level, the way that would work is that for every 2-year cycle, the government gives each registered voter an online account of campaign cash. You can't take the money out and spend it, but you go online and you assign it to the candidates that you want to support. And if you don't have a computer, they can also print out paper vouchers with serial numbers that can't be forged for those Americans. But if you have a smartphone or a computer, you can go online. And if you fund the system robustly as we demand, then if you're any solid candidate who wants to serve us, instead of being a corporate stooge, can get enough money from us to run a competitive campaign. And on the other hand, their opponents not going to have a lot of excuse for taking money from big pharma, big oil, health insurance companies, and so on. In a way, when they get to D.C., our representatives will keep doing what they're doing now, taking care of their donors. But since we're the donors, they take care of us, they listen to us, and then we can have government by the people again here in the country which invented it, after all. So that's sort of my mission in life, and my allies in New Hampshire are helping me promote the federal reform, and we're also going to introduce a bill in the New Hampshire State Senate next year to have a state-level voter-owned elections system just for the top 6 offices, executive council and governor, because those are the only races in New Hampshire that really cost anything. So that's what we're doing.
I got a question for you on that, Dan, and honestly, this just came to mind. Do you find, and especially as you move around the country and you get you get feedback or support or lack of support from different areas, do you find that certain regions of the country are more receptive to the idea of democracy dollars, or the better term that you use for them, where we actually, because I love the sound of government for the people, by the people. I love that. And yet as I hear you say that, I can think like, there's probably some places in the country that are more likely to be receptive to this idea than maybe some others.
Well, it's interesting. The system has already been implemented in Seattle since 2017 for city elections, and it won by ballot initiative in Oakland, California last fall. And the other efforts I know underway at the state and local level are all in sort of heavily Democratic cities. And if you remember from the 2020 primary, the politicians who really talked about the money issue most were Sanders and Warren, although in 2016, actually Donald Trump made a very big issue of money in politics, donated $60 million to his own campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I think later, once he raised enough money from big donors, he actually paid himself back. But the main thing is he made a statement about it, and in his second debate with Clinton, he went at her 5 times on that issue and talked about the carried interest loophole on Wall Street and her Wall Street backers, and she never had much of a response. So I'm taking a long time to get to the point. I think that there has been a perception that this is something Democrats want, but when you get down to the level of the voters, I tell you, I am getting a warm response on both sides of the aisle all over the country, because I've had interviews in many, with radio stations, and because talk radio tends to lean conservative, I see 2/3 to 3/4 of my interviews have been with conservative radio hosts, some of them very, very conservative, and nonetheless, even though like all these people that I talk to, some progressive, some conservative, like if I got them around the table at one of my dinner parties, I'd be sure to not serve anything that required a steak knife, because they might kill each other, Yeah. And they're disagreeing because when they started talking about abortion or guns or whatever. But on this issue, as I say, this is something that clearly has cross-partisan appeal, and that's no surprise, because for one thing, the problem is 100% bipartisan, because both parties are up to their necks in special interest money, and Americans on both sides of the aisle have been fed up for years with politics as usual and are disillusioned. And also, finally, on a more positive note, this is really about one of the ideals which make us Americans. I mean, we live in the only country on earth that stands for ideals. And for me, the Holy Trinity is individual freedom, quality of opportunity, government of, by, and for the people, which, after all, we Americans invented. And it's our ideals which make us Americans. And this is about, I think what we're doing is as American as apple pie. And I think that we're finding, I find people all across the spectrum can get behind it. And in New Hampshire, my New Hampshire allies have been talking about money in politics for years, and they go to town meetings, and they're getting just as much support on the Republican side as on the Democratic side. And in New Hampshire, the GOP's got a trifecta, both houses of the legislature and a moderate Republican governor, Chris Sununu. And we think our chances of getting a state-level system are excellent.
Very good. And we're talking with Dr. Dan McMillan. He is the founder of Saving Democracy Dollars in America. Dan, I read that, and it kind of goes along with what you were saying, like it or not, we are a nation of idealists, which you just said. And if we do not govern ourselves as a free, self-respecting people, we're almost not even Americans. And the idea that we will forever take this lying down once we see a concrete path to change makes no sense. Elaborate on that, please.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. And I think that, here's the thing. Americans for years have been saying they want change. And you've seen in the last 15 years, I see 3 presidential candidates who really have gotten tremendous mileage at a promising change. I mean, change was Barack Obama's, central slogan word in 2008. In 2016, you had on both sides of the aisle, you had insurgent candidates, outsider candidates running against the system. Sanders among the Dems, Trump among the Republicans. And as much as they disagreed on, say, guns or abortion, the top line message was kind of the same. Sanders said, we need a revolution. Trump said, we need to drain the swamp. The problem was all three of these candidates, none of them ever spelled out how the change was going to come, how the swamp was going to be drained. And the reason they didn't, that they couldn't, is what we most need to change is, politicians being for sale to campaign donors. And they were all, like everyone in Washington, they're too dependent on their donors to lead on this issue. And that's why, although I feel like there's this huge potential for change, this desire for change, there's a constituency for change, there's a consensus, bipartisan consensus for change in the country, but no one in Washington, no one running for office can step up and show a way to start change. And this voter-owned elections concept, is it going to get rid of money in politics entirely? No, it's not. But we don't need to fix the whole problem today or tomorrow or even next year. We just need to get started. And we need to stop tearing each other apart, and we need to see that our fellow Americans are not the enemy, that the money is public enemy number one. But the leadership has got to come from outsiders like me and thousands really of others like me around the country. And it's going to take some time to help our fellow Americans see just how damaging money has been, that it's money who stole our rightful say in how we are governed, and that this reform, this is a great first step that will have a lot of impact, and that it's a step, the best evidence so far is it's a step that Republicans and Democrats can take together. And that alone is good, because the polarization, which really I think the parties have stoked for their own interests, and the media at the national level, have stoked for their own benefit, that partisan anger is getting out of hand, and I think Americans are sick of it. Even Americans who feel the anger know it's not making them happy. And so this is a great opportunity for all of us to remind ourselves of what we have in common as Americans, what's great about our country. And, for me, it's kind of, if you want to make America great again, restoring government by the people is maybe the single best thing we can do to do that.
Absolutely. Dan McMillan, Dr. Dan McMillan, our guest this morning. Hey, Dan, I'm up against an ABC News break. Do you have a few minutes to hang?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Take your time.
We're going to get to ABC News. When we come back, I've got a few more questions for Dr. Dan McMillan. He is the author of How Could This Happen? Explaining the Holocaust and Get Money Out of Politics. The time is now. We're back with Dan McMillan right after ABC News.